Welcome to Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw. Oh, I am so glad you're here today because I have an amazing guest for you. Somebody that the whole world is maybe already talking about, but certainly is going to be very, very soon. His name is Chad Stewart, and he is the author of a new series called Britfield, the Britfield series. And I want to tell you that these books, well, first I heard about them through my assistant and some others who had read them, who said, "Oh my God, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop reading." But then I picked up Britfield myself, and I have to tell you, I'm in the fanatic club now. I am a full on raging fan. And I haven't read, I did not, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I did not really get into the whole Harry Potter series. Though my children adored it and it made a reader out of my son, and I bless J.K. Rowling. But this one I picked up and I will be reading all of the books. And what I love as a former teacher is that they have educational value. It's not just a little fantasy escape. They have educational value, and I can't wait to talk with Chad Stewart about that when we bring him on in just a little bit. But first of all, let's just get the show rolling, and let me remind you that I am a life transition coach. I am also an author. I am the author of Chakras, the Magnificent Seven, which is a kind of a primer on how to balance those energy centers in the body that are known as the chakras. Then my second book was called Grief, When Will This Pain Ever End? Grief is kind of my specialty, and grief and loss. And finally, and by the way, that grief book is not one you have to read from cover to cover, because when people are grieving, it's very difficult to focus. It's filled with short chapters, lots of articles and tools and processes to help you move through your grief and not get stuck in it. And then finally is my latest book called Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say, which is a kind of a little study in, first of all, what are the components of a helpful, comforting conversation when somebody has dealt with some kind of loss or emotional pain. And then we literally go through what's helpful to say, and then maybe more importantly, what's not helpful to say, the things you really want to avoid. And by the way, if you go to my website, paulashaw.com, you will find a little cheat sheet there that's my complimentary gift to you. And it's called 20 Things to Say and Not to Say to People in Pain. So be sure you go to paulashaw.com and grab that. Keep it in your purse, your briefcase, your glove box, so that you can skim through it if and when you need to have a difficult conversation. And finally, I want to remind you that if you want to hear past shows or get information about being a sponsor or a guest on this show, go to changeitupradio.com and you'll find all the information and all the shows we've ever done archived right there. Alrighty. And of course, remember, I'm going to remind you probably twice in this show today, if you find value in this show, please share the show and subscribe so that we can let you know when we have a new show ready to go. All right, so without any further ado, I'm going to put my little cheaters on here so that I can tell you a little bit about Chad Stewart. So he's a SoCal boy. He was born in Newport Beach, and I lived in Newport Beach at one time. That's kind of fun. He is an award-winning and best-selling author, international strategist, prominent speaker, and creativity educator. He founded the prestigious Britfield Institute dedicated to creativity and literacy. and Devonfield, a media empire committed to the highest quality in education, publishing, and film production. He received a BA in British Literature and European History from Brown University. He did postgraduate work at Harvard University and earned an MBA from Boston College. I mean, the man is a walking tour of all the best schools. Can't wait to ask him about that. And he's now pursuing a Master of Science in Advanced Management and a PhD in Creativity and Innovation at Claremont Graduate University. My goodness. And in the midst of all this, he's writing books, getting movies ready to go, writing plays. I mean, the man is a phenomenon. So, Chad, I don't think they're going to believe you're real unless you pop on here and let them see you and hear you for real. Welcome, Chad Stewart.
There we go. Great. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Paula.
My goodness, truly, you are a man who has accomplished so much. And I often find it fun to sort of go back to the beginning. So, what was your childhood like? How did you become so focused on creativity and obviously education? You've got a huge education.
Yeah, I was really blessed. I had a great childhood growing up in actually Corona Del Mar, which is a part of Newport
I
Beach.
lived there on
Yeah,
Marigold Street at
I
one
was on
point.
Carnation. I was on
Oh
Carnation.
my
We were
gosh.
neighbors. We were neighbors.
Yes.
And it was a beautiful neighborhood. There was a park down the street, and so it was just fun. It was like the neighborhood kids would get together. You'd go down to the park, you'd play, you'd chase, you'd hide. I loved that. We were right by the ocean, which was
Mm-hmm.
nice. So you could see it, you could hear it, you could smell it, and I think that had a big impact. And then my elementary school was right across the street, Corona Del Mar Elementary, and I
Mm-hmm.
really had a just a wonderful time there. And I think it's funny. I was talking with a friend of mine. We drove up Saturday to see a screening of a movie that's coming out next year called Reagan by Mark Joseph. It's going to be a
Ah.
powerful, powerful movie. And it was fun. We talked about that, and it's like we talking a little bit about elementary school, and like I think most people have fond memories. It's like middle school, not so much. High
Right.
school, not really, but elementary was amazing. And I really did have some great teachers. And this is kind of answering your question about writing and creativity. And it's all about the environment that you grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
Our next door neighbor had a huge yard. And so I was able to not only play in the yard, but build a fort. And it was kind of funny, like the progression over the years of the fort. It started out as a small little sort of box, and then we raised the ceilings, and then we added a second story, and we put a sort of a bench bed like thing in there, and you know what I mean. It is just being able to like envision things and be able to find wood and grab things and play and write, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that really impacted my life, and so much of it is it's not so much um, quote unquote intelligence, which doesn't really mean anything, or IQ, which again doesn't really mean anything. It's unfortunate what education and schools are trying to push, and what's his IQ score, and like none of all that really is irrelevant. We're all pretty much born with the same type of bodies, brains, brain development, etc., and
Mm-hmm.
especially at that young age, which is why we're focused on that sort of 10 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really about environment. So if you're in a tough environment where you don't have opportunities, if you want to paint, get your child, paper and some paints. You know what I mean? If they burn out after 6 weeks, fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they have that experience. If they want to write,
Yes.
get them a computer or paper or music. You know what I mean? Get them into a music class, and it's like let them experience as much as they can
Mm-hmm.
as their mind is developing, and they're trying to find what makes them work, if you will. What's their gift? What's what's going to become a part of their life? And I think for me, reading really took off when I was about that age of 11 or 12. I had a wonderful sixth grade teacher, and I attribute all of it to this. I was It was in sixth grade, and our assignment was to write a book. And it's like, can you imagine? It's like, at 12 years old, it's like, what do you mean write a book?
Whoa.
And I think it had to be like 25 pages. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be pictures, in a paragraph. It wasn't like a novel, but
Yeah.
still, it's just like, it's like having to write 3 pages of something was hard. But I think having that challenge, number one, and then number two, what do you write about? And it was, you could pick your title. You could write about whatever you wanted to. So that idea of freedom was great. And I
Mm.
learned at a young age, you write about what you know, and you write about what you love. And I love James Bond movies.
Ah.
Like The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. I kind of grew up with Roger Moore. And so my
Mm-hmm.
first official book was called James Bond Eat Your Heart Out. And I was a 12-year-old agent for the British government, and
Oh, I love it.
my partner was Jacqueline Smith, and this is kind of dating back to Charlie's Angels,
Oh, yes, I
and
remember
and,
it
and I
well.
had a Ferrari,
Uh-huh.
and so we're chasing this villain all through Europe, and it was just like this
Oh my goodness.
amazing fun book. It had some humor in it, and I think it that really launched my career. Now at the time, I didn't connect with it and say, "Oh my gosh, I want to be a writer." And literally years had passed, and I never had that goal of wanting to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it anchored me into it, and then for fast forward almost 40 years later, and here it is with Britfield and the Lost Crown,
Yeah.
about Tom, who's 12 years old, and his best friend Sarah, who's 12. Takes
Mm-hmm.
place in England, just like my first book. It's
Mm-hmm.
a fast-paced adventure series. It has twists and turns, adventures, spies, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, all that stuff was there waiting to come out from that experience. And so I'm not just saying everyone's going to be a writer, but by having those opportunities at a young age, really, really designed and crafted me. And then I know when I was in sort of the high school years, by 16, I went into an accelerated independent study program where I had a lot of private tutors, and I worked on subjects one on one and stuff like that, which I loved. I was bored with high school. I couldn't stand it, and we can't all be put into a box. And so
Right.
I learned a lot quickly. I was working full time by the time I was 16, so I was already experiencing life. And
Mm.
it's just simple things. Whether I was a bus boy, it's the independence, it's driving, it's showing up on
Sure.
time, it's making sure everything is clean, it's being clocking in and
Right.
then following orders and doing, and then working a long day or a hard day, getting a check, opening up a bank account. I mean, it was all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had the privilege of working for three self-made millionaires by the time I was 20, like within 3 or
Wow.
4 years. And again, too, nothing fancy, just grunt work or whatever. But I would show up. I'd be on time. I was dependable. I was reliable. I was a
Mm-hmm.
hard worker. I watched. I listened. How do they act? I'd ask them questions about things,
Ah,
and I learned, and I learned a lot.
fascinating.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
think I think a lot of that dictated my life. I think a lot of it dictated my passion for education and the understanding of how to learn, and that
Mm-hmm.
we don't all learn the same, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and really our passion to bring creativity back into the classroom and to help with literacy and make reading fun again. You mentioned Harry Potter, which I think in many ways, like our Britfield and the Lost Crown is really the opposite of Harry Potter, but it's in the same realm as competition. Whereas Harry Potter is sort of high fantasy, witchcraft, and all those things.
Right.
Britfield and Lost Crown in the entire series is takes place in present time. Real events, real places. The children have to make real decisions. None of them have magical powers. None of them are demigods or superheroes. So I think what's made the
Right.
series so popular was not just the writing, but kids can read it and relate to it. They can relate to Tom. They can relate to Sarah.
Yes.
It's like when you have a problem, you can't just wave a wand. That doesn't work, right? So it's that sort of disconnect with reality that most of the books out in the market are, and the
Mm-hmm.
movies.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of a flashover substance. They're fun and exciting, but you can't really take anything away, because guess what?
Right.
You can't fly. You know what I mean? And you never will.
Yes. It's a good
So
point. A very
yeah,
good point. I'm curious, Chad, are you familiar with Waldorf education?
I am. Yeah, I am.
My children went to Waldorf school because I too was very, very concerned that their creativity be allowed to develop. And I'm very thrilled to hear that you are so focused on bringing more creativity into the schools because, one thing I loved about Waldorf was music was part of the curriculum and was considered as important as math and history and all of the other things. Um, they didn't rush them into reading. They moved, they used their bodies in a lot of kinesthetic learning, and
Mm.
it was so good for my kids. I mean, they're both incredibly creative to this day. My
Mm.
daughter is a writer and also a singer, and plays piano.
Mm.
My son is studying acting. I mean, that creativity had a chance to really grow and blossom in that sort of an education rather than something that was densely um, intellectual and left brain focused. So when I was reading that you were such a proponent of bringing creativity back into the classroom, I was tickled to death. I think
Mm.
that's amazing and great.
It's interesting what you said about music too, and it should be one of those high marks of education. And what they have found with music, and it's true right now in the industry of technology and uh, is companies like Facebook or Apple or Microsoft. They actually are looking when they hire someone. Not only is creativity the number one most important skill set in the world right now, and we have
Mm,
all the data and
wow.
not engineering, not mathematics, not accounting, all that stuff,
Hmm.
whatever. But what are you going to do with it, right? Because it's all been replaced by AI and it's all been offshored.
Good point.
AI can never take the place of creativity, ever.
Mm,
But what they're finding is those kids, and it's interesting, kids that have played a musical instrument and read music, they didn't have to flourish at it. But if they had some kind of experience, whether it's a trumpet or a piano, and they read music, they find that those kids are better managers, they're better under crisis,
mm,
they're better leaders, they're better problem solvers, they're great at brainstorming, and so
wow.
those applicants are being hired 5 to 1, in some cases 10 to 1, versus other, really probably really great applicants, but they don't have that musical background. And it's just a
Yes.
fact. It's something that's been internalized inside them, and it's how they look at things and it's how they approach them. And so there's a big shout out for those that play music. It doesn't mean that you have to be a musician,
Hmm.
or cut an album. It's just having that experience, like a little bit what we were talking about before, about having that wonderful experience of playing different instruments. If your child wants to play the instrument, rent
Yeah.
it. You don't have to buy it. And if they're
Right.
burned out after a month, fine. But
Hmm.
give them as many opportunities as possible so they can find their voice, if you will, and find what they want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm very visual, as we said before, and I've traveled, all through Europe, and it's interesting. I could read books until the ends of the earth,
Uh-huh.
about certain places, and I don't really recall them. But when I physically am there, I can remember everything. I can remember the names and the details and the
Yes.
places. And there's just something about, and I'm the same way, like when I'm learning something, you could sit there and tell me for hours what we're going to do. And I'm like, and taking notes. And until you're actually doing it, you know what I mean? Or
Right.
writing it or figuring it out on your own. It's that combination, so.
Yeah. When you and I originally spoke, I said to you, you're doing so many things. Not only are you working on writing these books, and there's going to be, did you say seven in the series?
Correct. Yeah. 7 book series.
And you have now completed three, correct?
Yeah. Book 3 is finished. I actually just got the official page count yesterday for book 3. We're launching Britfield and the Return of the Prince, book 3, in August of this year, and the final page count was 616 pages.
Ooh.
Wow. I like I said in parentheses, I said yikes, because I was like, wow. So
Well, your fans will be thrilled because I know my assistant, who is a fanatic for your books now, she's reread the first one
love
twice
that.
already, and she's on the second round of the second one because she's so anxiously waiting for the third. So she'll be thrilled that she'll have 600 pages to keep her busy.
It's cute because real quick, because you said something about like the comparison of where we're at, and people hearing about Britfield, and it takes time, like with anything, but we're having national impact. We're starting to move globally now, with a
Mm,
focus on England, Australia, Poland, of all places, in Eastern Europe.
wow.
We'll be moving into like Germany and India, Japan, some of the other countries, and then eventually South America. But
Mm,
there is a rumble out there, and I can feel it. You know what I mean? It's just like we're so close to that, what one would call a tipping point. Of
yes.
really having that national exposure, and it's just a matter of time. I mean, we did uh, you know, over 2 years, we did multiple school tours. I ended up driving 9,000 miles, 23
Oh
states.
my gosh.
I presented at over 180 schools to more than 40,000 students. And we're
Mm,
talking like all types of schools. We're talking private, public, Catholic, Christian. I was at one of the top Muslim schools in Dallas, which was
wow.
interesting, a Jewish
Wow.
school in Tennessee. public, charter. I was at a charter. I was at a homeschool in a farm in Carson, Nevada. With students of all these different ages. So I've seen it all, done it all. It was fantastic. It was interesting to see all that kind of impact. But as the anticipation for 3 rolls out too, it's really cute because I'll get emails from parents and they're like, oh my gosh, it's like they found out it's gonna be launched in August, and so they're like, oh, my kid's been counting down the days. I thought
I love that.
I thought how cool is that? I got an email this morning from a parent that said, oh my gosh, we loved the series. Thank you so much for writing something that's clean and wholesome and educational. And she said we talk about Britfield all the time. And I just thought, isn't that cool? And
Wow.
And I think that's what's different about the book is that one of our sayings is that Britfield is the series of this generation, and it is.
Yes.
Where Harry Potter might have been that fantasy, fun, big books. You had a lot of kids that were reading, which had that. It contributed to literacy. Now we need something real, something we can learn from. And it's like, as you're reading the book, you're learning about history, geography, art, architecture, culture from all these different countries, England, France, Italy. Book 4 will be in Eastern Europe and Russia. Book 5, Asia.
Ooh.
Book 6 is South America. And then book 7, we come back for our crescendo in the United States. So.
Wow. Oh, that is really fabulous. And that's one of the things that struck me too. In the opening, I don't want to give away anything in the book, but there was a little bit of an Oliver Twist feeling to the orphanage and all of that. And sometimes I would find, it was so visual for me. And I wonder, did you do that on purpose? Because I'm not sure. I have to say this book is a treat for me because so often I'm reading educational things or self-help books or, that kind of thing that's going to help in my work. But this is like the first time I've done a book like this in a while. And it was so visual. And last night I was dreaming really visual, wonderful dreams.
I love that.
So do you plan that, Chad, or is that just a great byproduct?
Yeah, it's interesting. My background in writing was movie scripts, which is interesting. I started when I was about 18 taking classes, and then I started working with some professionals in the industry. And so I learned story and storytelling and the classic 3-act structure and economy of words and dialogue. And so I think when I started Britfield the Lost Crown over 10 years ago, I wasn't thinking about my background in script writing, but I had all that subconscious structure of writing a story, your midpoint, your plot points and things like that. So I think that contributed to it. I think I always write about places I've been, and you don't have to. You could write a book about Australia, a novel, and you've never been there. But I lived in England off and on for 2 years. I visited all these different places, and so I think that also adds that extra sauce to it, I guess you could say. and then when I'm describing things, let's say Oxford or something, I'm literally pulling up maps, looking at the maps in the streets. When I'm describing like a building or one of the colleges, I'm pulling up pictures and then literally writing it. So I'm trying to describe it as vividly as I can.
Yeah.
The 4-foot high, stained glass windows and the cobblestone in front with the neatly trimmed green grass. And I don't try to, we said before, I don't try to overdo it because I think most authors describe too much and they have too much description. And I think it takes away from the story and it takes away from the flow of the story because the way a story should be, in my opinion, is like a funnel, and when you're starting on the outside, you're coming into this world, right? And so it's great, a little background here and just some description. But as the story is continuing, the story is narrowing, it's intensifying, you know what I mean? There's trials and errors, more harder obstacles. They're refining it. They're figuring out where they need to go. They're learning some facts. You know what I mean? And so you're not having these massive paragraphs of description anymore necessarily because it's taking away from the story. You're like, yeah, that's great, but what happens next? You know what I mean? Or what happens when he sees her? And it's like I call them speed bumps. You know what I mean? And you're reading along, and all of a sudden it's like you got to slow down. Oh, and we end up just skipping them. You know what I mean? And everyone does this. Ken Follett. He's a great British author. He's written these massive 900-page books. Like I think it was Pillars of the Earth was one of them, and did this whole series of stuff. And he's he's a great writer, and I've seen him develop. But sometimes you can tend to get to that point where it's like you're halfway into it, and he's like, oh, he's spending a paragraph to describe how she looks, and it's like, doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
She wore a beautiful, silk blue dress or cobalt dress with a diamond necklace. Got it. Versus,
Hmm.
the earrings and the glasses and the hair was way, and it's like, who cares? It's like, you know what I mean? It's It's like, I get it. And so it's
Right.
like they almost overstuff or stuff it. But no, so I think that's great. And I've received that feedback from so many readers about how visual it is. They say it reads like a movie, which I think is
Hmm.
cool.
Hmm.
A lot of feedback has been like, I feel like I'm there. And so I
Yes.
love that. I love that comment. I love that I can paint this world and take you in there.
Yeah.
And many authors have done that for me. I mean, I was a big Charles Dickens fan.
Hmm.
And so, the book's in some way is sort of a tribute to that. I love Jane Austen, and so there's that in
Yes.
there. I
Hmm.
love the Bronte sisters, like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre.
Oh, me
Um,
too.
yeah, so there's a reason why it starts up in Yorkshire, Northern England.
Hmm.
I've actually been to their house, and walked.
Oh, cool.
I've walked the moors, and I've walked out. I've seen Wuthering House, the house from Wuthering Heights, the famous place. It's still there. There's still these two trees and this old sort of worn down cobbled building, and she based it on that. And so and to see where they walked, you know what I mean? So all
Hmm.
that had huge impact on me. And so I think I try to bring the reader into that. I've been to Oxford and walked around, and the feel that you have there. London, there's a
Yes.
reason, I love Hyde Park, I love Bond Street. In the book, Professor Hainsworth, which you'll eventually see, takes him for tea at the Brown Hotel. It's still there. It's in Mayfair. I've stayed there,
Ah.
and then they go over to St. James and they stay at the Duke's Hotel. The Duke's Hotel's real. It's still there. I've stayed there, and
Mm.
so I just it's that vividness and that I bring out.
It occurs to me, Chad, that for any of my listeners who don't know anything about the Britfield series, we haven't really given them sort of a nutshell of what it's all about. Would you do that?
Yeah, so it started as an idea over 10 years ago. Book one, Britfield the Lost Crown, took 4 years and 2,500 hours to write. And it's based on a 7-book series. It's based on Tom and his best friend Sarah. It starts in Yorkshire, Northern England, and then kind of moves through England to Oxford, to Windsor, to London, and then to the south of Dover, down to Dover. And somewhere along Tom's been an orphan his whole life. And
Mm-hmm.
the book starts out really, really quick that it's like, my name's Tom. I've been an orphan for my whole life. I've been at Weatherly Orphanage for 6 years, and this is the year I escaped. And I love that because it's like, it's like, I hate this miserable place. It's horrible. And you know what? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And their big vision among what I would call the orphanage club is and it's really cool because they're a family, and they all look out for each other,
Mm,
and age isn't the bracket, you know what I mean? The oldest
right.
is Patrick, and he's 16, and he's kind of
Hmm.
like, they call him like the wise one and stuff because he's been there the longest.
Yeah.
But their goal is to escape and get to London, the greatest city in the world. So it's kind of simple. It's a simple goal. Somewhere along the lines, they commandeer a hot air balloon and start flying throughout England as they're trying to escape, and they're chased relentlessly by the illustrious detective Gowerstone, who is renowned for finding lost children and catching
Oh,
escaped
I see.
orphans. And Gowerstone is a very, very cool character. He's a little combination between Sherlock Holmes and James Bond, and it's, I don't want to give anything away, but you, at some point, you understand his obsession with trying to find you know uh,
The escaped children.
children. Yeah, and so
Got it.
there's a great reason to that, and hook and stuff. but
Mm,
but it's just it's a coming of age story. It's a David and Goliath story of the kids against, the adults, or the big, or the corrupt adults, or the system.
yes.
And
Yes.
it has so many different themes, but it's also got a great play on the 4 C's. It's creative. It's the children use critical thinking, communication, collaboration. They and they're learning along the ways, and
Mm,
they're making decisions for themselves, and sometimes they're the right decisions, and they move forward. Sometimes they're the wrong decisions, and they learn from them. So it's just this active, fast-paced, moving series, and then there's a royal thread to it. and I don't want to give anything away, but if you look at the title, Britfield, so number one, what does Britfield mean? And you find that out by reading book one. And
Ah.
then Britfield and the Lost Crown. So what does that mean? The crown is something royal. So it's just this exciting, powerful story, and it's like you finish book one, and it's like almost a warm up. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then you get on to book two, which takes place in France 6 months later, and now Thomas and Sarah are 13 years old, and it's like it starts on that little island outcrop off of Brittany, and then it gets to Paris, and of course it's the Eiffel Tower, and it's the museum, and it's the Ritz Hotel, and it's Notre Dame, and it's all
Of
these great, and then,
course.
and then they kind of head down south, and then it's like Bordeaux, and then the Loire River Valley, the famous
Mm.
castle Chambord, which is that huge castle that you've seen where the rooftop looks like Istanbul.
Oh,
You know,
yes, yes, yes.
it was designed to look like that, and then off, kind of they continue, and so in book two it's 474 pages,
Mm.
and again there's always twists and revelations and learning. There's new characters. Some of the older characters come back, and then I just finished book three, which takes place in Italy, and it's Thomas are now 14 years old, a lot more wiser, a
Mm-hmm.
little and a little more mature, which I think behind me is that sort of cover for book three, and so it's very subdued but powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's more mature because the series is maturing, and you're going sort of from that middle school to young adult. So I think in some ways book two is our bridge into young adult. Book three is our young adult.
Ah,
Book three comes in at 616 pages, if you can imagine, and I guarantee you there's not one page that lulls. You sort of read a
yeah.
book and it sort of gets to that part where it's kind of flat lines a little bit, or
Yeah.
plateaus.
Uh-huh.
We just build and build and build and build and build and build and build crescendo. It's just you will not be able to stop reading book three. So it's exciting.
Whoa.
I
Well,
literally Monday, this is Monday, by 11:30 I just finished the second edit of book three. And
mm.
so what's kind of fun is that I don't want to talk too much, but I just dropped off 24 manuscripts at a school in Mission Viejo that we've been a part of, because we've done some presentations there and some things like that,
Yes.
uh, to 24 students that have read book one and book two, and they will read the manuscript. They
Oh,
have
that's so cool.
they have 3 weeks to read it, and then they'll fill out a survey. But they get the survey after they finish the reading. It's about a 3-page survey, and then
Mm-hmm.
I'm already scheduled to come in and start doing roundtables with them, 4 or 5 students at a time for about 45 minutes, to talk about what they liked, what they didn't like, if
Oh, that
anything
is so cool.
and that's been the
Chad,
process. Yeah, that's been the
we need to
process.
take a quick break,
Oh, sure.
but I love where you're moving to, because I want to talk when we come back a bit more about this work you're doing with schools.
Perfect.
So we will be right back. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and with me today is author Chad Stewart, who is the author of the new Brittfield series. And if you missed the beginning of this show, be sure you catch it after you hear the rest, because this is an amazing, well, first of all, an amazing man, an amazing author, an amazing book series that not only is entertaining, it's educational, and children are really getting excited about it. And I know personally, not only are children excited, I started reading it and can't put it down. My assistant has been like a crazy person, mowing through everything she can get her hands on, and now is chomping at the bit because it's August, right, Chad, when the next one will be released, book
Correct.
three.
Yes. Book three. Correct.
And he was just saying it's 600 and how many pages?
616 pages.
616 pages. But and if it's anything like these other books, that won't even be enough for the people who are in love with this series. And that one takes place in Italy. And what Chad was just sharing with us is that he's taken, did you say 25 manuscripts into a school in Mission Viejo?
Yeah, 24 manuscripts, and this has been the process. We did the same thing with book one, and
Oh, you
we have some other
did?
schools that we're going to be taking it out to also. But
Mm-hmm.
for book one, we took it out to about 200 students at different schools, private and public, and we did the same thing for book two. And so the thing is that's our audience. Those are the kids that are going to
Yes.
be reading the book. And
Yes.
so it's all selected through the teachers and kids that are readers and want to participate. And it's no
Mm-hmm.
easy task to read 400 pages or 500 pages and now 600 pages. Um, but it's wonderful. I mean, it's priceless. It's worth millions of dollars to a writer, because
Really?
they're real and honest. And it's always interesting because I'll come in and they kind of, like I'm usually in a library and I'm at a round table and 4 or 5 students that kind of come in during the different periods. And then there's a little bit of that awkwardness at first because it's like, oh my gosh, there's the author or there's the adult.
Yes.
I'm just a kid and I'm in school. But after we warm up, after about 3 or 4 minutes, and they see that, look, it's like, I'm here to learn. I'm the pupil. You're the teachers. And I've got a big notepad, and as they're talking, I mean, I am taking notes, and it's great because they just open up, and I think it's wonderful because number one, their opinion matters,
Mm-hmm.
and there is no right or wrong answer.
And
You
what
know what?
exactly are they sharing with you?
Yeah, we just start to dig into it, and I have a
Uh-huh.
survey, and so it's we start kind of easy, and I say, so what did you think of the book? And then it's like I always hear, oh my gosh, I loved it, or it's the best book I've ever read, or which is great, but that doesn't help me a lot. And I say, yeah,
Right.
that's great. Was there anything you didn't like, or anything that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of confusing? And once you start to dig into that, it's like, well, I noticed that this or that, and I have their notes too. I have their survey, so I can actually go back and I said, you mentioned something here about the character, and I mean, I've learned so much from that.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean it is, and I remember with book one, I had started the beginning from a very 180 degrees from where the book one beginning is today.
Mm-hmm.
And I started it by
Oh,
Tom introducing himself, and he said, "Hi, I'm Tom. I've been working my whole year." And he starts to describe all these things. To describes Weatherly, and I got so much feedback from the kids that they didn't like that. They just wanted to start on the story,
oh,
and so I rewrote the entire beginning of book one based on their feedback, and
really? So you
yeah,
actually do make changes once
oh
you've heard what they say.
yeah, and it's funny too because it's always a balance between what comments to take to heart and
Mm-hmm.
what ones, because it's like some kids will say like I loved all the history, a couple other kids will say too much history or didn't like all the history,
Right.
and it depends what sticks. But I'll never forget this little genius 11-year-old, and I think it was with book two, and he goes, yeah, I noticed that he goes, some of your chapter titles don't really match the chapter. And I thought, oh my gosh,
Wow.
and it just annoyed me, right? Because it's like he's right, you know what I mean? Like I kind of had like, it's like, it sounds cool, like it was like whatever it was, the mysterious door or what, but
Yeah.
it didn't fit to that chapter. And I went back and I had to rework some of those chapters. And I'll never forget this. Tom and Sarah are with Oliver, who's a character from book one, and
Mm-hmm.
they're in Paris, and they're sitting at Oliver's taking them out for dinner, and they're kind of Thomas are in these grubby clothes, and he says, you guys could really use a new set of clothing. He goes, would you mind if I took you shopping? And Sarah said, I'm a girl. What do you think? And I had 4 girls that said, no, I don't like that comment at all. Right? I'm a
Oh,
girl. What do you think? And I
yeah.
and I and as a writer, I'm thinking it's like, she's 13 years old. Would you like me to take you shopping and pay for it? And it's just like, yeah, I'm a girl. What do you think? So I took, that comment gone, right? And so
Sexist.
yeah, I mean, whatever, you know what I mean? And so it's just like it's little stuff sometimes, but it's
Yeah.
just it's I'll never forget that and stuff. So and so it'll be very amazing to see the feedback I get now with book three, because I've made it as good as I can. I've written as well as I can. But it'll be very
Mm-hmm.
interesting to see, and sometimes just like I was a little confused with this, or and one, and I'm always developing my style as an author, but especially with book one, kind of the rule of the thumb is like, let's see, if you have 2 people talking, then Tom says, like, where are you going? Tom said, okay, you've set off, so Tom's speaking, and the next one, and if it's only 2 people in the room and it's Sarah, she's like, I don't know yet, and then you don't have to keep saying Tom. You just say, well,
Yeah.
would you like to come with me? Not right now, it's a bad timing. But if you bring in a third person, the rule of thumb is whoever you introduced and you left off. Long story short, sometimes you don't know who's saying what. And so it could be something like, Tom leaned forward. I don't think that's a good idea. Well, why do you think that? Sarah asked. Well, you guys could do this, Oliver had mentioned, you know what I mean, or whatever, but it's just like, it's stuff that you make sure that, it's every sentence, it's not confusing. Clear. The dialogue isn't confusing. So I learned from them, you know what I mean? Whereas I thought it was clear and I thought, it's obvious of how it's working. Well, if it's not, then that's not good. And so it'll be interesting to see what's missing in 3 is clear, because I'm always playing devil's advocate when I'm writing. Well, is that really clear? How would they know that? Or, I'm always running about, 50 different parallels, because it's always, I'm very accurate. So it's like, time, distance. So it's like, if it's 2:00 and it's a 2-hour train ride, they need to be there at 4, they don't get there at 3, they don't get there at 5, or, whatever. It's just little things like that. Pulling up information. It's like, what time does the sun set in Rome in October? Right. And so if I have them outside at 5:00 and it's a blistering sky with burgundies and purples as the sun sets, but it doesn't set till 6, you know what I mean? It's just, it's things like that. I'm always trying to do, how much does it cost for a bus ride or to take the tube in London? How long is that trip? You know what I mean? So all those things, I mean, I'm constantly trying to stay on top of the research, but, because they're small details. It's like, you don't want someone to say, oh, that's not accurate, or that's not right.
Chad, when you and I first talked, I remember being so struck with, you mentioned that you've written now, or are you writing a play from the Brittfield book for school children?
Here it is. I met with the theater director yesterday. So it's here, and here's the Brittfield play, the official play.
Very good. So and who excited. Is going to perform this play?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've taken book 1 and transitioned it into a 90-minute 2-act play that's specifically for middle school and elementary. And when I say elementary, sort of that 5th to 6th, and then 7th to 8th of middle school, depends how it's set up. And I say specifically for that because number one, it's interesting in the world of theater for schools, because most of them have a drama program. Most of them do some type of presentation, whether it's, Your Good Man, Charlie Brown, or Christmas Carol, whatever. Right. But there's not much out there for the kids to, choose from, number one. And it's so much of it is dated, and so much of it are musicals. And there's nothing wrong with a musical, but it's just like, it's not really practical, because a lot of kids, we talked about this, about creativity in the arts, but a lot of kids that get into theater or drama, and it's a lot more popular than when you and I were, in elementary school. That was kind of the corny, lame thing. Now it's like, it's cool. I mean, at Mission Viejo's school, where I was yesterday dropping off the books, that's where we're doing the play. And I met with the director. And she's got like 150 kids that want to be involved in every theater production.
Oh my goodness.
But the problem is when it's a musical, how many kids sing? And if theater is really about acting, because there's a lot of roles for acting, you need that. And so I think what's fun about Britfield the Lost Crown is, number one, it's exciting and fast paced. Number two, it's current state. It's like happening right now, and it takes place in current time. So we're not going back to the 1950s. We're not going to some post-apocalyptic world.
Right.
It's an actor's play, because there's a lot of great roles for all the kids. There's great involvement for probably 40 to 50 kids.
Oh, wow, that's fabulous.
So the kids that are at the orphanage in the background actually could have a few monologue things, and then they become the background students at Oxford, and they become the background people at London, whether it's a guy carrying an umbrella trying to catch a cab, or someone off in a suit off to his business meeting, or a couple of girls in nice dresses sitting on the corner talking as Thomas are kind of running by, or whatever. Right. It has that wonderful, wonderful involvement. And so it took me about 2 months to transition it into a screenplay or a theatrical play. And then I gave it to Michelle, the theater director. And so it's perfect to work with her, because she's in the trenches. Yes. She's been doing this for years. So I could write the greatest theatrical play in the world, right? Oh my gosh, it's fantastic. But it's like, like the theater directors at the different schools say, but we can't do it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, it's got.
Right.
I mean, I learned a lot when I started in on this about 6 months ago. I learned a lot from Michelle, where she said, like every, at 12 years old, every student, like the main actors can't have more than 50 lines, and that's not something that one would think about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all these things that I learned from it as we're tailoring it.
Yeah.
It's just like book one, getting the feedback from my audience. We're doing the same
Right.
thing with the
Right.
play, working with a theater director, and then it's going to be launched in October. So that'll be our pilot launch of the play. And then once it's done and we get feedback and we see how it rolls out as a play,
Mm-hmm.
we'll finalize it. And then next year it'll be available to over 100,000 middle schools and elementary schools
Oh,
in the
that
United
is
States.
so fabulous. And I know my readers would hate my readers, my listeners would hate me if I don't ask, what about the movie? Is there going to be a Britfield and the Lost Crown movie?
Yeah, there will be. It's the movie has always been the big focus and the big point. You can see it as a movie. From our estimates, we believe two things. One is that it will be one of the most anticipated movies in cinematic history,
Mm,
and it will also be one of the most successful movies in cinematic history.
yes.
We believe that it will rival the first Star Wars and E.T. And
Ooh.
I used those as benchmarks because twofold. One is um, they're in the top 10 highest grossing movies of all time, adjusted for inflation. And number two, they're family movies. E.T. was
Yes.
a family movie. Star Wars, although science fiction, and I loved Star Wars. I'm a big Star Wars fan. It did have that fine. I mean, I was taken there as a child at 12 years old, and I mean, I was captivated. I watched it. I went to see Star Wars when it first came out. I saw it 13 times.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I couldn't watch it enough, and it
Mm,
opened up my world. And that movie influenced Britfield the Lost Crown. And you sit there and say, and I tell students, and they're like, what is Star Wars, the original Star Wars? What does it have to do with Britfield the Lost Crown? I say absolutely nothing. But on the other side, absolutely everything. The
mm,
adventure, the characters taking you
right.
to a place you've never been before, a little bit of humor,
Hmm.
um, you know, uh, triumph over tragedy, David and Goliath story. You have the ragtag rebellion against the mighty empire,
Right.
Tom and Sarah against Britain. You know what I mean? I mean,
Hmm.
it's just like
Hmm.
all that was there. And so George Lucas used space and the future for his vehicle. I used
Hmm.
Britain in the present for my vehicle. But
So
yeah,
I'm wondering, with all these degrees that you had, and none of them were really in writing exactly, what was the turning point? When did you decide to start doing this series? You said it was like 10 years ago. What happened? What
so
triggered that?
I was back east in Wellesley, Massachusetts for 16 years, and a beautiful town. It's where the famous Wellesley College is,
Oh,
and
yes.
yeah, and literally to this day, that's one of the most beautiful campuses you've ever seen. It's very the architecture is very medieval, and so it kind of reminds you of England.
Hmm.
And it's 20 minutes from Boston. But I was actually an investment banker. I was in that world of banking and finance, and I was at a Morgan Stanley as a broker, and I was sent down on the weekend of all things to this like horrible seminar. I think it was insurance or something,
Uh-huh.
and I always made a deal with myself when I kind of got back into school and graduate school that like there was three things I had to do. Number one, um, not sit in the back, but sit in the front, right? Because
Hmm.
I'd always like, I'm like cool. I'm always in the back. I'm like, no, I sit up in front. I always take a page of notes, no matter what. And so what that does is it gets me geared, and no doodling, right? Because I would tend to drift and I would tend to doodle.
Hmm.
And so I say all that because it's funny where this whole thing came from, but it was somewhere along there that I was sitting there and I was drifting off, and I literally did this. I drew a circle, I put three lines, a basket, a boy and a girl, and I wrote the boy and the balloon. That was it. That was that
Ah.
for that one doodle, and I thought, oh man, that'd be really interesting. I don't know why it just clicked with me, and I thought, couple couple kids, 12 years old, boy and girl, takes place in England, starts up in Yorkshire, Northern England. That's that kind of that draw to the Brontes
Hmm.
and that kind of mystical sort of world up there in Northern England. And they're in an orphanage, and they break out of the orphanage, and they find or take a hot air balloon, and they start traveling through England. And so that's how the whole story really started. It started very simple,
Wow. Wow.
but I thought that'd be a lot of fun, wouldn't it? You know what I mean? It's just like, I've always loved the vehicle of a hot air balloon because I think we can all attest to the fact that we've all seen one probably in our life, and you're driving along, and there's something so cool
Yes.
about it, isn't that? You're like, oh my
Yeah, it's
gosh, look at the hot air
magical.
balloon, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
and you're wondering like, gosh, what's it like up there? And I wonder what it looks like, and
Uh-huh.
and yet it's very simplistic. They've been around for hundreds of years. I mean, I haven't reinvented the wheel. I mean, it was around the world in 100, was it whatever days?
180 days.
Yeah,
Yeah,
180
yeah.
days, with the hot air
Yeah.
balloon. And
Yeah.
but I just thought that would be. Could you imagine? I mean, it's kind of the epitome of going from this horrible orphanage locked behind walls into this hot air balloon, seeing the
Mm,
world from
true. Freedom.
5,000 feet.
Yes.
Whereas on the other side of it, but you don't have a lot of control. It's not like a
True.
helicopter. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And you can land when you want. You're at the mercy of the weather, and
Yep.
anything can change. And so all those kind of elements played into that idea. But that's how it started, very simple. And I think there's a lot of people out there too that like they want to write a book or they want to write a story. And I always anchor it in this: write about what you know, write about what you love, and and
Hmm.
and don't and don't sweat the details, right? I mean, just you start with a simple idea, and that's how
Yes.
my book started. And it's just like, it's good to have a beginning and an end, know where you're going to start, know how you're going to end,
Hmm.
and then you just kind of fill in the chapters with where the story goes and stuff. But that's how my book started. It started real simple, and then all of a sudden, I didn't even have the British or the royal connection, but somewhere along the lines, I thought, oh, that's interesting, you know, and that's what's so fun about writing. It's just like, you never. I don't think there's a writer out there that starts their book or novel and has it all worked out in their head. You
Right.
know,
I think you're right.
I've gotten better. Like with book 3, I spent 4 months outlining it. Like, I
Hmm.
mean, like every single scene, which was
Wow.
fine. But there
Hmm.
was stuff that came out of it. And this is why you write, because it's fun. It's hard. It's
Hmm.
discipline.
Yes.
But it's the stuff that you didn't know or that you think of or you learn along the way. I mean, there's one scene in Rome at the Colosseum, and I wanted to include the Colosseum just as sort of a footnote because you're in Rome and you got to bring that in.
Yeah.
And it turned into this. It's like one of my favorite scenes now. And then before it was just going to be a quick footnote. And then as I developed it, and
Ah.
it's a couple people that are running from the police, and it's like it's closed and it's at night, and it's like, well, they got to get away, and where are they going to go? And I'm like, well, okay, maybe they climb over the fence and they go in the Coliseum. And I said, okay, but the cops are going to know they're there. Where do they go once they're inside? And I'm looking at a picture, and I'm like, oh, down below there's all those tunnels. And
Right.
I'm like, okay, well, they go down there and they go in the tunnels, and I'm like, well, where do the tunnels lead? It's like, oh my gosh, this whole underworld, this whole other world under Rome, and there's a certain sections where you have all the bones, you
Hmm.
know, and then what do the tunnels look like, and so like I won't go on and on, but I'm just saying all of that came out of it because and it came out of it from a practical sense, right?
I
Yeah.
love watching your mind work. Just in conversation, it's so amazing. And I see this creativity that's just what's the word I want? It's just bubbling out of you.
Mm.
And brings to mind a question. Do you think people are born creative, or can creativity be developed in somebody? Because you are oozing creativity. You have a lot of just natural curiosity that turns into creating something. So what do you think? Is that
Uh,
something
I,
that
I,
can be
I know,
developed?
scientifically that all children are born creative.
Ah.
It's a gift that we are all born with. Now, yes, some might be more attuned towards music or building or
Mm-hmm.
something. And with that said, creativity is also in everything. Creativity is in architecture. It's in mathematics. It's in science. It's in everything. But there's an interesting test out there. And if you want more information about creativity, your viewers should go to BritfieldInstitute.org.
Oh,
BritfieldInstitute.org.
good.
That's our that's that's
BritfieldInstitute.org.
our nonprofit focused on bringing creativity back into classrooms, specifically in Title
Great.
I schools. But there was a test that was given. It was by a doctor. I think his name is Lamb, and he was hired by NASA. It's like in the '70s, late '70s, to create a test for astronauts that would test their creative ability. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yes, there's the engineering background and mathematics, but we need astronauts that are creative, that can
Right.
think on the feet and solve problems and do all of that.
Yes.
And so he created this amazing test. And then what he decided to do is to take this test out into the school system. And so he did this over a 20-year period of time. And he tested 5-year-olds, thousands and thousands and thousands of 5-year-olds. And at 5 years old, 98% of the 5-year-olds scored at 98%. So basically, you had 98%
Wow.
geniuses. So 100 students, 98 creative geniuses. He
Wow.
tested those same students 5 years later, and their creative scores dropped down to 30%. And
Oh,
then 10 years later, at 15, and they dropped down to 10%. And so in 10 years, those little creative geniuses went to almost creative ignorance. And
wow.
and most of that is the school and the system, because they teach towards the tests, they teach irrelevant things, they put a
Right.
huge emphasis on mathematics, which couldn't be more relevant. I think math is important.
Mhm.
But beyond the basics of math, number one, they don't need it, and they're never going to use it. And I can say that for a fact because I was an architect, and I did engineering, and I also did banking, and I never needed anything beyond basic math. So unless you want to
Yeah.
be a mathematician, so they're spending all geometry and all these other things and the importance of math is like, yes, having a foundation in it is good, a little foundation in science is good, all that kind of stuff. But creativity is the core. And so it's just an interesting test to see that decline.
Oh, that
Um,
sounds really fascinating and so sad.
it
You
is.
know, so sad. And I know that I had done some reading about that kind of thing when my children were small, and that's why I did put them in Waldorf school.
Sure.
But there's something else you shared with me that I think, I could talk with you for hours, Chad, but unfortunately we're almost out of time. But I think this is important. You have this creative genius in you that survived, that didn't get killed
Yes.
in
Yeah.
spite of a lot of schooling and advanced schooling that you've done. But what do you think makes the difference between somebody who's creative and creates, gets things done and gets things out there, and somebody who's creative but just never quite makes it happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we did, I was doing an interview series. I think we did 6 or 8 interview series last fall, on education. It was interesting too, because we actually had one of the founders of LinkedIn on for an
Oh,
hour, and that was fascinating. But we're living in an era right now too where there are no more excuses, because it used to be, it's like, you don't do art, you're not going to be an artist. You don't do music, you're not going to be a musician. You can't get a
mm-hmm.
job doing it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, horrible advice, to say the
Yeah.
very least. But we're at an era now, which in many ways is a creative revolution, and
Mm.
we're in an era of micro entrepreneurship. And because of the internet, because of technology, there are just so many opportunities for creatives to find work, to make a living at it. But what's the difference between that vector? And it's not to say that you need to, quit your job. You know what I mean? I mean, I could, if we had hours, I could tell you about, all the greatest authors all had full-time jobs. I mean, gosh, even Einstein
Wow.
was a patent clerk, you know, for years,
Oh my gosh.
and desperate to try to get a professorship, and then finally was a professor. So I think he was a patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, for like, I don't know, 8 to 10 years. Don't quote me on it. But that was kind of a safety job, and then he was taking science classes, and
Mm-hmm.
he was writing his things, and then trying to get a professorship. But so many authors, successful authors, were professors, are still professors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they didn't necessarily make a living off their books, or it wasn't really until they hit their fourth book. I can't think of his name. John Irving. He wrote
Oh,
Cider House Rules and the
yes.
World According to Garp. Yeah, it wasn't until his fourth novel that he was able to. I think he was a high school coach or something. I forget what it was,
Mm-hmm.
but he was a teacher, and wasn't able to leave his profession until he sort of hit that. And you're talking like fourth book. You're talking 8 to 10 years later.
Yeah.
So it's like there is no overnight success in anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they say that every no overnight success takes between 1 to 2 decades, and and the
I
and
love that.
the difference between a hobby and a profession is about 8 to 10,000 hours. Now I know that's kind of a Malcolm
Mm.
Gladwell thing, but it's very accurate, and it's funny too because we'll look at like actors today that we like, and they're like, oh my gosh, they're making $20 million, and it's like, oh my god, they just got an Oscar, and it's like, I
Mm-hmm.
guarantee you for a fact, you go back in their acting career, and
Oh, yeah.
you'll go back at least 10 years, but you
Mm-hmm.
can probably go back about 15 to 20,
Mm-hmm.
and it was when they were 8 years old, and they got their first commercial, and then they disappeared for a year,
Right.
and they went on 500 auditions and were rejected in every audition. And then they came back and they did a couple commercials the next year. And then they auditioned for like 200 different roles. And then they got a bit piece on this television program that, was a pilot that never got picked. And you go on and go on, but they stuck
Sure.
with it. They did it because
Sure.
they loved it, and they finally kind of hit it. And that's really the truth for most careers. Um,
Yeah. I
but it's
think
like, yeah,
you made some amazing points. And so, and out of that, what I'm hearing is discipline. I heard you mention discipline. So, and I think you mentioned to me you write every day from 7 until 10, correct? In the
yeah,
morning, every
exactly.
morning.
Yeah,
Discipline, organization is important.
huge.
And from what you just shared, determination, I think, and clarity, that
Yes,
goal that, you just know that's where you are going to go. And you just hold on to that dream and do the work to create it every day.
correct. Yeah,
Correct?
I think that's very accurate. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think too. It's like it's not getting distracted, and that's something that comes clear to me right now is do not be afraid to fail because you will. And if
Yeah.
you don't, you have to fail because you have to learn. And don't worry about the critics. Everyone had them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's. I mean, Richard Branson, who's worth $5-6 billion today. Virgin Airlines, Virgin Music. It's like he failed so many times. He was close to bankruptcy. He was actually arrested. Ralph Lauren, the famous polo brand, almost filed bankruptcy twice. Disney lived in poverty for over 5 years
Wow.
as he was trying to peddle and pitch his little classical characters. I mean, I could go on and on. The
Mm-hmm.
famous Gillette razor, his name was King Gillette. He spent 17 years developing it until he finally became a success. This disposable razor. I mean, it just goes on and on. But these are the stories that nobody knows. They just look at the surface. They look at the success, and it's like it's not practical. It's not real. And when I'm in front of
Right.
all these schools and these kids, these 11, 12-year-olds, I tell them this. I don't go in there with pie in the sky and say, "Hey, you can be anything you want to do," and hey, just stay. I'm with it. I tell them, I had an idea. I said it took me 10 years from my idea to when we launched in August 2019.
Mm.
10 years of hard work, dedication, failure, trials and errors, depression. I tell that to them. I
That's
tell them,
so good.
I tell them about George Lucas when he wrote Star Wars, and he already knew everybody in Hollywood, and he had already done 2 movies. And when he took out his draft, his first script of Star Wars, every single person in Hollywood rejected him. Every single person.
Wow.
Everyone thought it was stupid. Everyone thought it was a ridiculous idea. George, nobody cares about outer space. They already have 2001 Space Odyssey, this fantasy, with the Darth Vader, and he's talking ridiculous, dumb, and he spent years and years until finally a studio picked it up. One of my favorite is Toy Story,
Oh,
Pixar.
yeah, Pixar.
It took Pixar 10 years from concept to launching their first movie.
Really?
Everybody in the industry thought
Wow.
they were ridiculous. They were trying to bring technology into animation. It's like, why rock the boat? It works. Disney's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys know about storytelling? Blah blah. And I can go on and on and on. But that's the truth. That's the
Yeah.
reality of it. So
Yeah.
I don't speak in a harsh term and say, oh, it takes forever. I speak from a practical term. It's just a fact. There are no overnight successes, and if there is, guess what? They're petter out real quick. It's kind of like the one hit wonders, right?
Yes.
But
Right.
they didn't have the team or the band or the creative capability of writing the next song,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
you might have that one hit book, but it's like there was no follow up to it because
Yes.
it's like they got lucky or it's just timing or all these things and stuff. But,
That's so important what you just said. And so much of what you shared today, Chad, is so valuable. And I'm so grateful that you took this time to be with us on Change It Up Radio today. I will really be encouraging all my listeners to share this show because I think it's really important. And I love what you've created. Thank you for being the creative person you
yeah.
are and the determined person because you've stayed with us a long time. And I think that's a piece that so often kids aren't taught. that it may not happen overnight. You may have a lot of work to do for 10 years to get to this success. And today, I think so often, like with social media, people start trending when they've done very little, and then others think, oh, it's so easy. I can make that happen. But I think it's important to remember that sometimes a really good, even a really great idea takes some time to get off the ground. And if you believe in it, then you just keep working it and you keep nurturing it until that time comes. So thank you. And I'm so glad the time has come for Britfield. And we're all very excited about book number 3 coming out in August. And if people want to learn more, Chad, or if they want to get more information about you or your work, if they're educators and they want to reach out to the foundation, where should they go?
Yeah, you could just go to Britfield.com. So it's Britfield, Britfield.com. That's our main website. It's a wonderful website.
Oh,
it's an award-winning website. It's got over
great.
400 pictures of England. So
Ah.
I recommend anyone that reads the book, check out the website, because it'll walk you through all these different places, starting up in Yorkshire, then Oxford, and then London and all that. We've got interactive maps, lots of information. Our school tour is on there, so lots of pictures from all the cool schools that we've been to, our books, our store, a lot of our media interviews, national, international media interviews and stuff like that. So that's the best one place to go.
Britfield.com.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, Chad. Well, thank you so much once again. This was great fun. And really, truly, on a personal level, I'm really honored to have been able to spend this time with you. You are a creative genius and you're putting something amazing out in the world, and bless you for it.
Well, thank you. Gracious.
Thank you. I want to thank all my listeners as well for listening. And remember, you can hear us on every major podcast platform, including iHeartRadio and Podopolo, my favorite new platform. And remember to subscribe, share the show. You know the drill. Please, let's share all the cool things we learned from Chad Stewart today. And we'll see you next week on Change It Up Radio. Bye-bye now.